Okay, this is the video for the project DataBasics, where we're going to be learning the basics of data or information in a computer. So let's start by opening up CodeBucket and going to the project DataBasics and opening up the file DataBasics1. There's two parts to this project. This is the first part. Now, we're going to be using some variables, but not yet. Focus on this part of the screen and look at there are three types of variables that we're going to be working with in this course: integers, boolean, and strings. Now you've had some introduction to these, but in this project we're going to focus on integers, which you might recall are numbers, and strings, which are strings of characters or letters and symbols that make up text in a computer. Now the computer thinks of these two types of information in two very different ways. And so in this project we're going to learn how to work with these two types of pieces of information. The next thing I want you to look at is this output window button right over here. If we press it, we get a bunch of commands, the first of which says show output window. What do you think that does? Well, obviously it shows the output window. Let's explore what that is. Let's put that in our code and let's run the program and see what happens. And you'll notice, although a window appears, it's a window with no width and no height. It's a window that has it's just there. But over on the bottom right hand side of the screen there's this other window that appears, and this is what's called the output window. Every computer has what's called a standard in and a standard out. It's how the computer sends information out and how it collects information from the outside world, or how it gets information inside the computer, the input. So this is the console that we're going to be working with in this project. So let's close that up and let's go to one of these other commands right here. We've got integer in, string in, integer out, string out. Now these are kind of self-explanatory. Integer in allows you to input a number or an integer. String in allows you to input a string or text. And integer out and string out outputs integers and strings. So let's start with string out. And if you notice, the command is void, which means it doesn't return any piece of information, and it takes one parameter or piece of information, a string. So the only kind of information that can go inside of this command is a string, which is a string of characters. So we can type anything we want. Let's type a question like, what's your name? Alright, what's your name? And let's run the program, and as you might anticipate, you should see the string, what's your name? And there we go right here. What's your name? Excellent. Now let's try to output the answer to that question. Now you can put anything you want, but I am Mr. Odenz, so I'm going to type Mr. Odenz, what's my name, Mr. Odenz, and voila. Let's see what happens. And sure enough, we get what's your name, Mr. Odenz. Now that's not formatted very nicely. Mr. Odenz comes right after the question mark on what's your name. But if you look over here in the code, that's exactly what I told the computer to do. I said output what's your name, or a string of characters, capital W, then lowercase h, a, t, apostrophe s, space, your, space, name, question mark, and then the next command says output and capital M. And that's what we see here in the output window. Now, if I wanted a space between the question mark and the M, I would have to put that somewhere. So I might put a space, or maybe two spaces, and now I'm outputting what's your name, question mark, space, space. And that might look a little better. Let's see if it does. And sure enough, that looks a little nicer. But let's say I want to go a step further and I want to put Mr. Odenz on the next line. Well, I need to put what's called a carriage return, but you just need to think of it as a new line command. Whenever you press the enter or the return button, that's really what you're doing. You're telling the computer to begin a new line. So, conveniently enough, we have a command that says, or that tells the computer to do that. If we put a new line after what's your name, and technically we don't need to erase this, but let's get rid of those spaces. Now we're telling the computer to output what's space your space name question mark, then start a new line, and then on that next line begin capital M Mr. Odenz. Excellent. And now let's run the program, and voila, what's your name, Mr. Odenz? Excellent. All right. And that's how to use string out. Let's move on to the command integer out, which outputs, as you might think, an integer. Now, can we type in, what's your name here? No, that's not a valid value. Why? Well, if you notice, in the command, the command returns nothing. It's typed void, and it takes one parameter. And what type of information do you need to put in it? An integer or a number. What's your name is not a number. So let's erase that and let's put a number. Let's put the number 5. I don't know. No, let's put the year. Let's put the year 2012. Excellent. I don't know why it's doing that. It's okay. There we go. And let's see what we get. And sure enough, what's your name, Mr. Odenz, 2012. Now that doesn't look very good. Notice the integer is outputted right after the Z of Odenz. Why? Well, that's because that's what I told it to do. Again, if I want a space between Mr. Odenz and 2012, I have to put a space or a couple of spaces there. But if I want a new line, I have to put new line. And voila. What's your name, Mr. Odenz, 2012. Okay, wonderful. But what does 2012 mean? Now that I asked a question here, I answered it. Let me ask a question for this number. And obviously the question is going to be what? What year is it, right? All right, let's ask that question. What year is it? Great. What year is it? Now, can you think of any formatting issues we could deal with before we run the program? Well, if you said, let's put a new line before or after what year is it, so that the answer 2012 appears on the next line, you'd be correct. Let's put a new line there so that looks nice. And let's see what that looks like. And there we go. What's your name? Next line, Mr. Odenz. What year is it? 2012. Now I think I could go a step further and make that look a little nicer by putting a line, or I'm sorry, a space between Mr. Odenz and what year is it. So in order to do that, rather than just starting a new line, I'm going to start 2 new lines. And there we go. Okay, now I have a question and an answer. A question and an answer. One answer is a string. The next answer is an integer. And that's how to use string out and integer out. What you should do is open up DataBasics 1 and create your own, or 2 questions. One that asks for a string and outputs a string answer, and another question that outputs an integer answer.